It's great to welcome back to the program today Henry Giroux, who is the chaired professor for scholarship in the public interest at McMaster University. Henry, it's so great to have you back on, although I guess I should say, unfortunately, under these circumstances, in some sense. I think maybe to start with, one of the conversations I've been having with folks in the sort of political space, the overtly political space, about authoritarianism, and sometimes people talk about fascism, et cetera, as concerns with this incoming administration, is that a lot of people come to me and say, yes, a lot of the rhetoric certainly was extraordinarily authoritarian and fascistic from Donald Trump during the presidential campaign, but we question his real interest or ability to implement to some degree some of these bad ideas, and therefore it's not as concerning to me. What do you think about any aspect of that as an argument?
I think it's a form of diversion. I think that we need to take what Trump says very seriously, especially in light of the changing nature of the administration. He has surrounded himself with a bunch of ideological ghouls who it seems, Stephen Miller in particular, who it seems to me are very dangerous and are very focused. And I think, unlike the first presidency, he's quite serious about what he wants to do. I mean, when he talks about immediately deporting up to 20 million immigrants, or he talks about shutting down the Department of Education, or he consistently echoes sentiments around white supremacy and Christian fundamentalism. I think we need to be alert to the language. Language matters. And I think that people who don't take language seriously often find themselves in a space in which self-delusion turns into a form of self-sabotage.
What do you make of, or let me put it a different way, is it fair to make an assessment or come to a conclusion about the American people on the basis that he was able to get himself elected? In other words, is there a fair assessment to be made of the voters based on Trump's success on November 5th?
I think the real question here is what is the role of culture in basically either enabling or disempowering people? What are the institutions that basically undermine an individual's perception of himself and her or herself in a society that is basically increasingly marked by inequality, white supremacy, a number of ecological the assaults on the planet. What is it that limits the ability of people to basically be insightful, to be critical, to be informed citizens? You know, democracy doesn't exist without informed citizens. So I don't want to blame people or blame the populace. I want to ask myself the question, what happens in a democracy when the truth basically is sublimated or substituted for ignorance, when reason collapses? And what are the institutions responsible for that? And what are the conditions that are being overlooked that basically mobilize people towards the appeal of a strong man? That's a pedagogical question. It's not just a political question. And I think the pedagogical question is enormously missing, it seems to me, from these debates about Trump, about fascism, about a whole range of issues that really speak to the emergence of a very dark moment in our history.
There are some who say, yes, I am concerned in the way that you were outlining about Trump, but I felt that the dishonesty came from being told the economy was good when it really didn't seem good to me, being told that I didn't need to worry about immigration or crime by Kamala Harris. And I believed I did need to worry about that, right? I mean, my point is there's a movement that would agree with the principles you're giving us, but would argue they felt the darkness and deception came from the Democratic candidate and the current president. What do we say to
I,
folks who make that claim?
no, I think it's a terrific point. And I think that I want to make clear that when I talk about Trump and I talk about fascism, I'm not just talking about Trump the individual. I'm talking about two parties, one of which is much worse.
Mm.
But in some ways, the Democratic Party simply failed to address the issues that most working class people live out every day. There's a language in both instances that it seems to me disassociates themselves from a language in which people can recognize themselves and
Mm.
recognize the problems that they're facing. And to say that Trump and Trumpism just took advantage of that, but the Democrats, I mean, from Clinton on, have almost nothing to say to working class people in ways that would suggest that the future is that they're being written out of the script of democracy. They're being written out of the script of prosperity. They're being written out of the script of social mobility. These are the issues that people want to know where they're getting food from. They want to know why they have to make a choice between medicine and it seems to me healthcare or food or putting their kids to school. So no, I think the issues of everyday life were simply not addressed by the Democratic Party. That's for sure.
Is
Although
there some sense?
I don't believe the solution is by saying that. I don't think the solution is Trump.
Right.
I think that's a mistake.
Yeah, well, that was going to be sort of where I wanted to go with this, which was it seems that if we're honest, even though the solutions proposed by Trump were sometimes barely even qualifying as solutions, and sometimes they really wouldn't fix the problems, on some level, it does seem like some voters saw Trump's rhetoric as more genuine than the sort of Kamala Harris, same speech 3 times a day, tax deduction for small business owners, and this stuff that, like, I don't know. There seemed to be something that, even though Trump seems to me completely disingenuous in the sense of he'll say anything if he thinks it'll help him get elected, regardless of his personal belief or ability to implement it. But for some people, it seemed genuine based on what I'm hearing from them. Is that possible?
No, I think that's possible. Where I have trouble with that argument is that it doesn't go far enough. I
Mm,
mean, at one level, there's the argument that there are basic democratic, economic, political, and personal needs that characterize a democracy that need to be addressed. At another
yes.
level, there are people, and particularly authoritarians, who will make an appeal to those concerns, but in a sense, want nothing to do with them, and they actually do see them as a threat. I mean, Trump is not going to, in some way, address questions of inequality. That's for sure. At another level, the Democrats, who basically have aligned themselves with Wall Street in ways that are unmentionable and have ignored the war in Gaza. It seems to me they've been enormously disingenuous and out of touch. And I think in both instances, what we're talking about is not that Trump had something to say that mattered or the Democrats ignored it. David, we need a third party in this country. You need
Mm.
a third party. You need a party about democracy, not a party about oligarchy, or not a party about simply in some way reinforcing the interests of Wall Street bankers. And that argument has been ignored, except for some. It's a marginal argument.
There are a couple of specific policies that I'm curious to get your thoughts about in one specific sense, which is how would the general public react? And the answer may be it depends which part of the general public. We'll see. But the couple things I'm thinking of that have been bandied about are these militarized mass deportations, which
Yeah.
would necessitate the construction of some kinds of facilities. Some are calling them camps, detention centers, whatever. That's one policy. The other is the potential targeting criminally of journalists and political opponents for obvious reasons of retribution or revenge. Whether he could get away with it in terms of whether he can hire the people that will do it or not, you can weigh in on that. But really what I'm interested in is, do you have a sense of how the American and global people would react to such policies?
I think the first question for me is the answer to that lies in the fact that Trump and his core and his allies are certainly concerned about that, and that's why they ban books. That's why they destroy any sense of history that matters. Because the last thing that they want to see when the trains go running through these towns with immigrants packed in them, there are certain memories there that correlate with something in the past that
Mm,
speaks of something horrendous. And that's true for journalists. Remember, the first sign of authoritarianism is to eliminate the critics that basically hold it accountable. And I think that as bad as the legacy press can be, those assaults will be so visible, so obvious, so horrendous, David, so at odds with even the weakest notion of what a democracy is about. I think there's going to be an enormous pushback around these issues.
So it sounds, if I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it sounds like you're saying that would be a bridge too far for too many people for them to get away with that.
I believe that, yes, I do. I do. I think it'll be a bridge too far. And I think the third bridge will come with the tariffs. And all of a sudden, people find themselves actually in a worse condition economically than they had been in the past.
One of the things that seems to have been prevalent in American politics, let's say at least for the last 20 years, is that often when bad things happen, the blame is placed along partisan lines. I'll give you a couple of examples. When Obamacare included the state Medicaid expansion and a bunch of red states opted not to do it, it was the decision of Republican governors. You did have voters who said, Obama didn't give me my health care. And of course, Obama offered the expansion. Some states didn't do it. It was the governor's fault why they didn't have health care, not Obama. But if you wanted to see Obama as the villain, you saw Obama as the villain. You can probably see where I'm going with this, which is some of these tariffs will certainly make products more expensive. A lot of the economic policy that Trump has outlined would make life more expensive for Americans. I have this idea the right people will be blamed, but I'm not confident based on history that that's the case.
Look, I mean, we're in a period when we're engaging in a massive historical struggle, it seems to me, over democracy and the institutions that support it. And I think when you disengage that kind of question from a crisis of consciousness, a crisis of morality, and a crisis of education, and a crisis of critical thought, and a crisis of truth itself, we get into a space in which we say, can we blame how are we going to figure out how the red states are lying about
Yeah.
Obamacare, right? What we really need to ask is, what is it that's happened in the culture that makes ignorance so profound that it becomes difficult for people to address questions like this and make the obvious obvious? And that is, this is not just about healthcare. It's about an attack on the public good. It's an attack on education. It's an attack on the critical functions of agency. It's an attack on collective struggle. These are the issues. The other stuff is just simply it's detritus. I mean, it's a consequence of those problems. But we
Mm.
tend not to get to the source of the problem itself. Uh, People should be able to immediately recognize that when in the red states, governors say, no, we're not going to accept federal aid for healthcare. Hello? I mean, that's not exactly a profoundly complex issue, is it? What's complex is the culture of ignorance that mobilizes that possibility for not being able to see through what's going on politically. We don't know how to hold power accountable anymore because the institutions that are supposed to do it are under enormous attack, whether it's your program, whether it's the media, or whether it's education. These are all pedagogical institutions. These are all institutions that operate off the assumption the truth matters, history matters, politics matters, and collective struggle and critical thinking matter. And they're being destroyed precisely for those reasons.
I want to ask you a little bit about for those who are motivated to resist or oppose. Mark Elias had an interesting article saying the resistance of the first Trump term is not going to cut it. There needs to be sort of a more durable opposition of sorts. And I think he makes the case that this is more than just a semantic distinction. He kind of lays it out. What does history tell us about in these cultural moments? What are the effective ways to robustly oppose what may be coming?
I think the first thing is to make power visible and to make the problems that we face visible. They need to be visible. They need to be put into a comprehensive narrative in which people can recognize themselves. We need a language that is some way contextual, that touches people's lives. I mean, the left has failed on this. We need to get away from the abstractions and we need to talk about issues in which people can say, that's me. I understand that. And not only understand it, recognize that they need to go further in some way to address those problems. Thirdly, we need a comprehensive understanding of the problems that we face. We need to be able to translate, David, personal issues into larger systemic issues. Not to do that is to privatize everything, including the assumption that all social problems are problems of character.
Mm.
problems of individual morality. That is the most depoliticizing moment, it seems to me, in neoliberal ideology. It's worse than medieval ideology. I mean, it just makes people powerless. Lastly, we need a unified party. We need to bring these groups together under a comprehensive narrative that really showcases one particular term: radical democracy. Democracy, what is it? You can't be a racist and believe in democracy. You can't believe in inequality in a country run by oligarchs if you believe in democracy. And we need to bring those moments together in which people can work together for that larger narrative outside of the individual narratives that are often driving an oppositional politics.
We have been speaking with Henry Giroux, chaired professor for scholarship in the public interest at McMaster University. Always a pleasure having you on. Thanks so much for your time.
Okay, David, thank you for having me.